Hello and welcome to the first Jack and Joe show meets, and we have Ali Maxwell from the Not the Top 20 podcast. Ali, how are you today?
Very well, guys. Delighted to be joining you. Delighted to have Fulham back in the Championship, and it's always nice to be on Fulham's premier podcast. Or podcast is probably doing you an injustice now. Multimedia platform. Been big fans of Fulhamish for a few years. Lucky to be mates with Sammy and Jack as well. In fact, I went to Craven Cottage with Sammy just a few weekends ago to see your insanely comfortable second gear 2-0 win against Hull City. So I'm delighted to be joining you guys, and thank you for having me on.
It's great that you got the grey jumper memo as well.
Yes.
That was not planned, but is obviously wonderful to see. For anyone that hasn't, I recommend listening to Not Top 20's 1 to 24 predictions, because the first thing I was going to ask you, Ali, was you predicted Fulham to finish first in those predictions, which is obviously wonderful for us to hear. Currently, we're obviously only 5 games in. We're sitting top of the league. Have you seen anything so far to change your mind on that, or are you pretty confident that us and West Brom are going to be up there by the end of the season?
Yeah, I probably haven't been this sure of an automatic promotion duo after 5 games of a season since we've been covering the leagues as closely as we have it in probably 6 seasons or so. And there have been some very good sides promoted from the Championship. And it's not just that yourselves and West Brom are looking so strong, although that's probably the key part of it. But also the league as a whole. I think the competitive balance of the Championship has been chipped away at a fair bit over the last few seasons. I dare say yourselves and Fulham fans listening or watching might have recognised that even in Fulham's own performances and in the strength of the opposition that you've come up against, and how you have not slowly, but how you have pretty comprehensively moved to the very top of the Championship food chain in the last 5 seasons or so. And I don't think outside of yourselves and West Brom, with Sheffield United having started so poorly, with Bournemouth, who felt like the kind of 4th team that would be in that party in the top 4, starting okay, but certainly not on the same level as yourselves and West Brom. So very confident of a top 2 finish. We had you above West Brom for strength of squad reasons more than anything. I've actually been delighted to see how differently both teams are going about being an excellent Championship side. I've really enjoyed watching both Fulham and West Brom to start the season. And that's nice for us when you've got 2 teams who are likely, in our eyes, going to run away with the top 2 positions. And I'm sure that just saying that out loud will cause some nerves amongst Fulham fans. But it's nice to have 2 sides doing things quite differently, very different tactical approaches. But in my eyes, 2 exciting brands of football as well. So yeah, very, very confident that our prediction of a Fulham automatic promotion will come true. The only issue with the title being won is the strength of West Brom, I guess.
Yeah, you mentioned you went to the game against Hull with Sammy a couple of weeks ago, and what in particular did you pick out as being particularly impressive with Fulham's performance? Because it was very, very comfortable from start to finish. Although Hull, started very well, they had a couple of chances they tested, Gazaniga in goal, but what was it that you saw that impressed you most?
Well, I've probably been more impressed watching some of Fulham's other performances this season than necessarily that Hull game. And it wasn't that Fulham did anything poorly, far from it, but it was just so comfortable from the minute that Mitro headed you guys in front that it was difficult to read too much into, that second half really petered out, didn't it? I mean, it was I was actually, it's the first time I've ever been in the Hammy End. It's such an impressive stand that I probably hadn't appreciated it as a neutral from other parts of the ground. I've sat in the media section before, I've sat in other areas, and it was just quite funny to me how I was delighted by the atmosphere. I thought it was a really good vibe and atmosphere around the place, and yet there wasn't really much happening on the pitch in the second half. And so the sort of focus of the fans' voices was basically just to get upset with the referee, who wasn't really letting things go, probably wasn't punishing Hull players enough for some transgressions, and in the eyes of Fulham fans as well, was penalising Fulham players for but it was all pretty marginal stuff, and it was all a bit of a waste of time that second half. But again, that was that's not anti-Fulham in any way. What I've just enjoyed in general, and it was fun to watch in the flesh, but I don't think Fulham were able to cut loose maybe as much as you have done in other games against Millwall, particularly, because Hull did make it difficult. Sort of they lost 2-0 in that game, and that's probably one of the better results that some teams in the bottom half will get at Craven Cottage this season. And you're right to point out, and very fairly so, that they had those first forays in the final third in the first 10-15 minutes or so before that goal. So I guess really drilling down, the things I took away most from the game were just the improved style of play, as I see it anyway, under Marco Silva versus under Scott Parker. A lot of possession still, but to me there just seems to be much more impetus with it. And individual performances stood out to me. Seri in front of the back four, I hadn't seen play before, and I think it's clear after 5 games, isn't it, that this guy is just a cut above the level, and it's great that he's staying and seems motivated to play his role, which is really important for your team, because outside of him and the centre backs, it's basically 7 attack-minded players, isn't it? So really exciting stuff. And to be fair, Sammy pointed out the sort of the way that Mitro seems to be adapting his game a little bit, dropping a bit deeper. I don't want to make comparisons with Harry Kane because I think that's a bit unfair on Mitro, but I guess in the same way that we have noticed Kane dropping a lot deeper over the last 2 years, and bringing others into play it much more than he ever did before. And actually both of those strikers realizing that doesn't necessarily mean they will get fewer chances either, because if they are better at linking the play, they improve the whole attack of the whole team. And if they can get themselves in the box at the end of attacks, then they'll get just as many chances, if not more, than they ever did. So I was really pleased to see that, because 2 years ago Mitro was the top scorer in the division, but I didn't feel like just his profile as a player and how he played basically outside of scoring the goals was necessarily that helpful for Fulham's attack as a whole. And it's a bit of a tricky one to balance that. You've got the top scorer in the league, and here I am saying that there are reasons why I don't think he's helping Fulham maybe reach their full potential. And with this new sort of part to his game, I think that kind of goes out the window. One of the problems I had was I didn't think you guys were ever much of a threat on the counter. And if teams set up in a low block, they could defend. And as long as Mitro didn't get a chance in the box, I didn't feel like Fulham were too tough to defend against 2 years ago under Parker. That's completely changed now. You can dominate teams in possession. You've got this mad transition threat now with all these attacking players buzzing around Mitro and Seri holding the fort. It's good stuff. As you can tell, I've really enjoyed the first few weeks of the season from a Fulham point of view.
Yeah, and we have as well, because like you were saying then, it is such a change from 2 years ago. I mean, I feel like our squad now is unbelievable for this level. I thought it was very good 2 years ago, and one of my gripes at the time with Parker, and you hinted at it then, was maybe not using the squad to their best potential, relying on sort of moments of individual brilliance like Mitrovic finding a bit of space, heading it in, Cavallero shooting from distance, whereas now we're creating chance after chance after chance. But on that squad, we made some more reinforcements on deadline day to strengthen it even more. We had Anguissa going out, as was expected, really, although it was expected for Seri to go as well, and he's still here, luckily. So, and we brought in 2 players that were at Watford, and was interested to see what you thought about these signings, seeing as you'd have seen them play in that Watford team that got promotion last year. So it's Nathaniel Chalabar and Domingos Quina.
Yeah, well, the first thing to say is Quina, and I don't want to do him a disservice or dampen any excitement, is someone who this time last year, when Watford came down, I felt like that was going to be a good thing for Quina. Again, it's a bit of a weird thing to say, and it kind of raises eyebrows. But for certain players, actually, their club being in the Championship, not the Premier League, can be quite helpful, particularly 20-year-old players who are, I'm loath to say luxury players, but who are, very attack-minded midfield players who may be in a team that is backs against the wall in the Premier League, not dominating possession, are going to be the first ones to lose their minutes. So I felt like Quina might have a breakout year last season, and it didn't happen at all. I think he started the first game of the season against Middlesbrough on Sky, and didn't play particularly well, didn't really impact the game, possibly didn't enjoy the physicality of it, whatever it might be. Watford weren't ticking along very well to start the season, even though they were picking up points. They weren't performing particularly well. They didn't look like you guys are looking. And he really struggled Ivic quite quickly. He kind of fell out of favour. And I don't really remember him doing a huge amount in the first few months of the season. And then, of course, I think he went out on loan in the second half of the campaign. So that was disappointing from my point of view, because what I'd heard from Watford fans who had watched him play for either in spells in cup games or in the development squad was that he's someone who can make something happen. You know, the sort of player that we all want to see, who can score a worldie from range, who can drift past players with ease. I guess I just haven't seen it myself at championship level yet. And so given the way that some of these attacking players like Wilson, Carvalho, you know, even guys, even Naskins Cabana, who, you know, poor bloke, he really does flit in and out, doesn't he? And he tends to perform pretty well when he plays.
Yeah.
Cavallero, I might be getting this wrong, but with Cabana and Cavallero, I never feel like they are sort of truly loved by whoever's in charge of Fulham at any given time, even though for the most part they perform pretty well and they put up decent numbers. So I guess I'm wondering a little bit how quickly Quina gets into the team, how many minutes he gets to start with, and if things are going really well, how many minutes he gets ultimately. I'm not convinced that he will play that much, but I'm sure if he does, and if he, you know, if Silva finds a role for him, I'm excited to see what he can do, because I know that he's got some real attacking skill. He's just got so much competition. I think you could probably say the same for Chalobah. Like, I know Anguissa left late on in the window. I mean, Onoma's been starting mostly, hasn't he, over Anguissa? Yeah. And I see Onoma as the Anguissa sort of type player, not Chalobah. Chalobah doesn't have quite the same drive going forward. Not to say he doesn't get into the final third much, but I think he's much more comfortable in the middle third and probably in the defensive third, building up play, than he is carrying the ball forward, playing defense splitting passes. I don't see those as his real strong point. So, of course, you know, there might be times where Seri suffers injury, where he's fatigued, where Seri, dare I say it, he might in January feel like moving away, whatever it might be. We don't know. I guess Chalobah, I would see him playing more in that role in this current Fulham setup than the more advanced central midfield role. But I've always been a massive fan of Harrison Reed as well, and I believe he won't, not too far away from being back involved. So Reed versus Chalobah, I think Reed's level 2 years ago, around the time, you know, those last few months of the season and the playoffs, was higher than Chalobah's level last season for Watford, frankly. So for me, I don't see either of these guys being first team, you know, first 11 players for you guys this season. That doesn't mean for a minute that they're bad signings, because you know, you need a whole squad, and they're clearly good players for the level. I think both of them will have games where they have to play because of injuries or rotation. I'm sure Quina will have a match-winning moment at some point. I'm sure Chalobah will be perfectly good when he plays. But those, you know, partly because of the squad you already have and how you've already started the season, those players are going to be hard to dislodge. So I guess I didn't necessarily see a blazing need for those guys, but they're not going to hurt, are they?
Yeah, squad depth is so important, especially at this level. And Harrison Reed came off the bench on Saturday and was fantastic. He actually played a little bit further forward than the central defensive midfield position he usually plays. So that will be interesting to see what he does, Marco Silva, for Harrison Reed going forward. The championship as a whole so far has been pretty fascinating. And of course, you've got Fulham and West Brom at the top. You've got Sheffield United very much struggling. But who do you think may come good, or who's impressed you the most so far outside maybe the top six and it's gone a little bit under the radar?
Yeah, basically the question that I'm asking myself every week at this point is kind of who's best of the rest. I mean, Bournemouth, as I say, especially with a couple of additions last night that I think look really good. Ryan Christie in particular, who they've signed from Celtic. I really think he is too good for the Championship. From what I've seen and from the Scottish football experts that I've spoken to, they're all really surprised that he's not gone to a Premier League team. It was only £2.5 million as well, because he was coming to the end of his contract. So a really good pickup for them. And crucially, unlike the guys I've just talked about for you guys, Bournemouth did have gaps in their squad. And a creative, dynamic, you know, attack-minded number 8 probably was one of them. So, you know, I'm not the sort of guy that sees a transfer being made on deadline day. You know, we're already over 10% into the season and thinks, oh, that takes them from, you know, playoff chasers to automatic contenders. I don't really think that's how it works most of the time. But Christie, I do see having quite a big impact. I think he started 3 games already for Celtic this season, so I think he's ready to go. And they've signed some good attacking players who I think can help them perhaps go to the next level. So I think Bournemouth, although I haven't been that enamoured with how they've started, I actually think they got a bit lucky in some of their early games that they won. And they've drawn recently to Hull and to Blackpool as well. So it's not been an amazing start for them, but good enough to be unbeaten, good enough to be on 9 points from 5, which is a good start. And I think probably they have strengthened enough in the last week that are probably they might be your closest challengers. Stoke have started well, but haven't really played anyone good yet. They were lucky to play Reading on opening day because Reading were all over the place in terms of their squad not having been put together. They beat Swansea, who, this is a good time to play Swansea with a new manager who's ripped everything up and wants to start again. And they beat Forest 1-0, who have clearly been terrible. And that sent them to Craven Cottage, I think, with a bit of a chip on their shoulder, probably feeling, a little bit like, hold on, you haven't seen us yet. We might spoil the party. And it just wasn't the case at all, was it? So basically, I don't see there being anyone aside from maybe Bournemouth, but not yet, who's going to reach the same sort of levels as yourselves and West Brom. I should mention QPR and Huddersfield at this point because they're also in the playoff places at the moment. Huddersfield, equally, their 3 wins have come against 3 poor teams. They beat Reading 4-0. They beat Sheffield United. Again, great time to play Sheffield United because I'm sure they'll strengthen under Slav, but we just haven't seen it yet. Yeah. And they beat Preston 1-0, a game that kind of could have gone either way against a poor Preston side. So again, their points have come, they've accumulated them against the poorer teams in the division. And until I see them beat a top half team, I'm not going to be going overboard with them. QPR are kind of probably the most interesting one because, it's not a flash in the pan, their strong start to the season. They had the 3rd best record in the Championship in the second half of last season behind Watford and behind Norwich, who obviously went up automatically. So, it's over 6, 7, 9 months now that they've been the 3rd best team in the division. There they are in 3rd at the moment. I think their performance levels will need to improve to sustain 2 points per game or anything near that. But they've massively improved their defence, which was really holding them back. And going forward, they're really good. They've got Austin and Dykes, and they signed Andre Gray as well, who between them you could probably trust to finish off chances. And outside of that, they've got these players, Ilias Chair and Chris Willock particularly, who, they're not necessarily household names in the wider English football game, but I think they're guys who are very much on the upward trajectory, and they just combine brilliantly. Really clever, good attacking footballers who can set up goals and score them as well. So they seem to have got the base behind that lot sorted for the most part. So I think probably QPR so far the ones who have impressed me most outside of the top 2.
Yeah, and one of the teams you mentioned there was Bournemouth, and obviously as Fulham fans, we've all got our opinions on the Scott Parker situation and him leaving us in the summer. I was wondering, from like a neutral point of view, what were your thoughts when that happened? And do you think that this ends up being quite a good move for both parties? It sort of seemed like the end of the relationship, especially with all the players that were going to have to be integrated to this squad at Fulham that he's sort of cast aside in the past couple of years. And you look at the relationship with players like Mitrovic as well. But in terms of the Bournemouth job, do you think it suits him, and do you think he's good enough to get them to a decent level? Yeah,
you know what? I think the way you framed it there as being good for all parties, I would probably be on board with that. And that's nice because I'm a positive guy. I don't really like slagging people off. I don't like really being negative about anything because that's not a good way to live. So it's nice to hear you say that. And I agree with it. I think from a Fulham perspective, for that key reason that you pointed out about, him essentially putting some key men from the promotion team to one side for 9 months, to then ask them to come back into the fold and help you go again, help you win promotion. I don't think that would have sat right with a lot of people. I was surprised, there were spells where I watched you guys in the Premier League last season, and I was surprised to see how impressed I was with some of the performances that I saw. There was that stretch, I think, I can't remember exactly what month it was, where you kept playing really well and not winning games. I think you drew with Spurs, and you're playing a really quite, to my eyes, maybe it was just for a portion of the season, quite an exciting brand of counter-attacking football, which was a bit more exciting than the fairly stale possession-based game that I saw for much of the season before. So for me, definitely a good move for Fulham to switch it up, to get a fresh face in the dugout for players to buy into again. And it was a smart hire. It was such a smart hire, Marco Silva. I think George and I are probably bigger fans of him, before the start of the season than a lot of people were. I think probably because we dig a little bit deeper than the headlines and the narratives and the he said, she said, and things have stuck to him that happened in the Premier League, some of which are fair because he made bad decisions and some of which are just completely false in terms of his actual performance, which for the most part was pretty good everywhere he was in the Premier League. And the crucial thing for me was the jobs that he did at Olympiacos and Sporting. They felt more relevant to me than anything he had done in the Premier League. You know, managing teams that are dominant in their division with the talent advantage, and basically just having to implement a style of play that was very attacking, but was just, enforced supremacy over the rest of the division. That's what he did at Olympiacos. Sporting, I think, was a bit more hit and miss, but that's already what he looks to be doing at Fulham. You know, he's already implemented a style of play that has you, I think, the second best attacking team from open play at the moment in terms of XG, just behind Fulham, but way ahead of them in terms of open play goals. And crucially, it's not at the risk of conceding loads of chances or looking really open on the counter. So you've got the best open play conceded in terms of expected goals so far. So that's a really nice added bonus. And as for Parker, it wasn't a high bar for him to get over, because I didn't rate Jonathan Woodgate. I didn't particularly rate Jason Tyndall. I felt like Bournemouth, had they had a better manager in the dugout, probably would have made a better fist of promotion last season, albeit they still made the playoffs. So, again, not a high bar for him to clear. Early signs are that he's definitely a better option for them than what they had in the dugout last season. Whether or not it's to the extent that they'll really challenge the top two, I'm not sure. Bournemouth are a side who, the longer they stay at this level and the fewer parachute payments they get, the more trouble they're going to have in terms of keeping the strong squad that they have. Selling Danjuma obviously allowed them a bit of leeway to bring in a couple of players. But I think, they really do have to make sure that this is the right hire. And, so far the possession-based style, it looks kind of similar to what it looked like under Fulham 2 years ago. And I think there's probably an extent to which they've relied on individual quality to pick up points so far this season. So it'll all be quite recognisable for you guys. It's probably not my preferred approach in comparison to Fulham and Marco Silva, but he's got probably a stronger squad at his disposal. So, yeah, good for all parties, I think. But I'd be happier if I was a Fulham fan than a Bournemouth fan.
Yeah, it was amazing, because at the end of last season, we were like, let's not lose Parker because he got us back up. But, in hindsight, I think we're in such a great position right now. It's so exciting. The likes of Rodrigo Muniz. I mean, we'll come on to Silva a little bit later. I just wanted to ask you about Slavisa Jokanovic. Another former manager, of course. They brought in Conor Hourihane, Morgan Gibbs-White yesterday, and Olsen who used to play for Everton. These are smart signings that they needed to plug the gaps. I suppose they, in midfield, the Sanderberg situation, didn't really know what was going to happen with him. I think he's stayed now. So Sheffield United have started so slowly and so disappointingly. What's next for him, and what's going to happen with Slav as well? Well,
he hasn't seemed like a very happy man recently, and I know that is kind of his default setting anyway. But even in being unbeaten for 22 games or whatever it is at one time with you guys, you don't get a huge amount out of him in the post-match interviews, do you? He can be quite hard to warm to, I think, compared to some managers who play the media very well. And it's really the football that his teams play and the success that he's had that has made him such a cult hero for yourselves and for Watford fans as well. So we're just waiting to see that on the pitch, and early signs haven't been very good. It's a very muddled squad, leftovers from a very specific system that Chris Wilder played, that I'm sure Slav, I'm sure he respects it. I'm sure ultimately he would try and move away from that, and it's right for the club to try and move out of Wilder's shadow anyway. It's incredible what they achieved under him, but there's no use kind of sitting there and thinking about it too much now. They need to move into a new era. I don't think they could have hired a better manager to do that. And there seems to be a feeling that stuff going on behind the scenes is just making it quite difficult for him to bring in all the players that he wanted. And that's a bit of a blow, really, for him. Some good additions, as you said. Gibbs-White, someone I'm really excited to see. Had a really good start to his loan spell at Swansea. I think it was the start of last season. First sort of month or so, he was looking excellent, and then picked up an injury, went back to Wolves, ended up playing some Prem games last season for them. I just think he's a real all-rounder, someone who's still incredibly young, but's actually quite a lot of experience as just being in and around senior setups. I think he could be set to thrive if the team around him is good enough for him to do so, as a kind of advanced midfielder, number 10 or number 8. I think he could be excellent. Hourihane is one of my favourite ever EFL players. He's the EFL dream. He got released by Sunderland, he got released by Ipswich without barely playing a senior game, and started again at the bottom with Plymouth Argyle. captain within a year, even as someone in their early 20s. Then Barnsley, captain within 2 years, just constantly moving up the ladder. And then obviously with Aston Villa, reached the Premier League. So I'm a big fan of his. He's been on the pod a few times, and he's got great quality in his left foot. I guess in terms of the fit for the squad, it is not dissimilar to John Fleck in terms of profile and position and the sort of areas they want to play in. And maybe Fleck's being phased out. Maybe Sander Berg, he looks great. He carries the ball really well. He's huge. He's not really impacting games at the moment. So they just need to find a balance, really. Norwood's at the base of midfield. I think he's probably the one that they can rely on the most to do his job and do it really well. He still switches play up there with the best of them. They just need to get it right in front of him. And Slav hasn't quite worked out how to do that with, 6 number 9s basically, and very few wingers. So it's all a little bit odd. And I must admit my bullishness that they'll come good and they'll improve in the second half of the season and maybe go on one of those runs that you guys went on under Slav. It's being chipped away at a little bit in the first 5 games, but it's still early days. And certainly these additions will have helped them, I think.
And just going back to Marco Silva, you were saying before that you were maybe a little bit more positive about that appointment than a lot of outsiders, probably a lot of people inside Fulham as well. I have to admit, when I first saw it, my initial reaction was, I'm not sure how this is going to go, purely based on the way that the Everton and Watford jobs ended. He's had a fantastic start, and he started so well at most clubs that he's been at. So I wondered, do you think that this is partly due to that he always starts well? Are you at all worried that throughout the season we could hit a bit of a plateau and maybe start to fall away slightly? Hopefully not out of the top 2, but I just wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, maybe, but it's just such a different prospect in the Championship to the Premier League. The jobs that he did in the Premier League were never with a big 6 team, and of course in the Prem, as you guys well know, every third game minimum is against a team who are probably going to beat you, and it can be quite draining. And it means that any personality clashes or anything where your head gets turned a little bit and people know about it and it gets reported, I think those snowball a lot easier in tough conditions. Whereas for you guys, I don't even know what the potential issue could be, but for you guys, it's just hard for me to imagine that it could really derail what is a really, really strong team, a group of players who look like they're loving their football at the moment and who look like, you're not going to win every single game, obviously, but it's very hard for me to imagine there being a run of games where other teams are outplaying you, because it just seems impossible based on what we've seen and based on the group of players that you have. In terms of him having his head turned because he starts well and other teams start taking notice, you just have to hope that he's learned from that, because he must. I mentioned it earlier. There's this sort of he basically had some bad PR and some bad narratives surrounding him by the time he left Everton, and I think he'll probably be aware of that now, because he'll look at the jobs that he did pretty objectively, because that's what managers do, and he'll say, actually, my record was pretty good in the Premier League, and it's not really fair that I haven't had a chance since then. But such is life, such is the way that football fans follow the game, the media, and all that sort of stuff. And he's probably been on the wrong side of a bit of narrative, in the same way that other managers benefit from everyone liking them and being pally with fans and media. So I just hope that whoever's advising him, understands that the best thing that he can do in terms of getting back to the Premier League is to take Fulham there this season rather than have his head turned. I suspect that will be the case. I can't. It's hard for me to imagine him being offered a better job mid-season at the moment, because it's a great place to be. It's a lovely place to live. Not too far away myself, and it's pretty fun winning 75% of your games. So I think with the history, it's always going to be something that's brought up, because there's nothing really else to point at the moment and be negative about. So you've got to find something to worry about. Otherwise, you wouldn't be true fans. But I'm not too concerned.
Finally, you made a very interesting point on Monday's pod about competitive balance and West Brom and Fulham dominating the league so far, and then you can look at last season with Watford and who else went up, Norwich. So what's to be done to rectify this sort of situation? It's very impossible. You have to kind of just abolish parachute payments, surely. But what can be done about this?
It's a great question. It's really tough, and as with anything like this, there's there isn't really one obvious answer. There are certain things that people point to as things they'd like to see because they think they would help. And sometimes the things that people point at, they haven't necessarily had a huge amount of thought about other impact that would have on the pyramid. It's a very, very tricky topic. It's probably one that I'll struggle to really make sense of it in one short answer. I probably wasn't that concerned about competitive balance, sporting integrity, as I put it, in the Championship until COVID. I think that has really had a huge impact because those parachute payments, you guys and Norwich and Watford still got the same amount as you did, as the teams did pre-COVID, which is understandable. But that money went so much further in the last 2 seasons than it would have done previously. You've also benefited, although it's a weird thing to say, from European clubs, Premier League clubs, slightly less so, but other European clubs who might otherwise have tried to buy your players after relegation, not really being able to do so. And therefore, I think increasingly some players at the moment, dare I say it, Mitro and maybe Seri, realise that they're in a pretty good spot. It might not be top tier football, which is probably where they want to be, but they could be doing a lot worse. And actually the security of staying at Fulham where they're comfortable is going to be the right thing to do. Whereas possibly pre-COVID, there might have been a bit more heads being turned. You often saw teams come down and they just didn't sort out the atmosphere around the place at all. Stoke City, probably the most egregious example. So, I mean, abolishing parachute payments would obviously cause chaos, would basically close off the Premier League. The difficulty is that teams are already struggling going up to the Premier League. So it's, and the Premier League encourages them to spend loads of money in order to buy players and increase the wage bill in order to try and compete. So it's just a real issue that we have in the game at the moment. I think that better distribution of the money that the Premier League gives to the EFL, which is mostly the parachute payments, but then also they do give solidarity payments to all EFL clubs as well. I think that could probably be balanced out a little bit better. I'm not sure that, but it's so tough, and I'm not an expert in football finance. So the key thing for me is, while I do agree that the parachute payments don't help with the imbalance, the problem is clubs, the way that clubs are run and the way that they are allowed to spend and lose money. People talk about spending. They should talk about losing money, because that is, it's a much starker way of describing what's happening. And I think it probably hits home a little bit more than when you just say, well, teams are being very ambitious with their spending. Invariably, what that means is they are losing tens of millions of pounds a year. And that's fine for a while. That's fine as long as you have a chairman or an owner who has tens of millions of pounds a year and likes to set fire to it. And most of the time they talk a pretty good game and they reassure fans, and the fans feel like, yeah, this is good because we do want to reach the Premier League and it's right. And our chairman's got us in safe hands. But over the last 5 years, we've seen quite a few clubs whose chairman have either stopped caring as much or stopped being able to lose that amount of money, to waste that amount of money. And sometimes you don't see it coming, but when it does, that's when clubs get into real difficulty, because they do have to run as a business. Like, you can't just, unless someone's giving you the money to burn, you can't just burn money, because quite quickly you get into big trouble. The EFL, I think, are trying a little bit harder to enforce their rules a bit stricter. You've seen with Derby and Sheffield Wednesday, those sorts of issues over the last few years. The EFL have gone after them in a way that maybe they hadn't done to quite such a strong extent over the last few years. And it's tough for fans of those teams to take. But if it puts off owners of Championship clubs losing so much or trying to find loopholes in various rules, I don't think it would be a bad thing. The difficult thing for me is, I strongly believe that spending across all EFL divisions has to go down. Now, that's not going to happen because it should happen. That's not going to happen because we all think it's the right thing to do, because that's not how the people that run football clubs think. And they're always going to have their own interests at heart. And they'll never vote for something that caps them realistically, albeit they did flirt with a salary cap in League One, League Two briefly last season. So realistically, for what I think needs to happen, the EFL have to impose incredibly strict rules on people who have bought businesses, as much as I hate to say it. These guys aren't used to being told what to do. And in any normal business, you wouldn't just be massively restricted by your industry. in what you can spend or what you can lose. So the other thing is, for anything to go through in terms of change in regulation in the EFL, the people that vote on it are the clubs, and the people that represent the clubs are the owners of the clubs. So it's just, I really don't understand how it can be truly sorted. It's something that it does upset me, because I think the Championship has had this, well, it's been the best league in the world. I truly believe that. And it's my favourite league in the world. And yet this season, lack of competitive balance only seems to be going one way at the moment. Maybe post-COVID, if things can get back to normal, we can start to balance the ship a little bit. But yeah, it is upsetting for me personally, because I prefer to see a more balanced division. But as I said on the Monday pod, I'm also a big football fan. I like tactics. I like attacking football. I like the various different ways that teams approach winning matches. And, Fulham and West Brom have been great to watch the first 5 games of the season. I don't lay any blame at their door for what's happening, for you guys being great, a winning football team. It's just a shame that at the moment, the level of the division, I think, is being chipped away at, and it gets us into a point where it's not the most unpredictable league in the world anymore, I'm afraid. So we need to stop saying that.
Yeah, exactly. And, Norwich and Fulham have come down the last 2 seasons and said HMS pissed the league. And from a neutral point of view, you don't really want anyone hearing anyone saying that, because you want the most exciting, everyone going for the top sort of division for the season. So, yeah, but honestly, thank you so much, Ali, for your insight. It's been absolutely fantastic. Joe, any final words?
No, that was really interesting at the end. Thanks for your insight as a neutral point of view. It's very good to know from what people from outside the Fulham bubble are thinking, because we're all, and maybe, I don't know if it is just me, but maybe it seems a little bit too good to be true at the moment. I'm sort of, the outside compliments and stuff that are coming in are very strange, and we haven't seen that since Slav. So yeah, thanks a lot for coming on and giving your insight.
My pleasure, guys. I'm looking forward to coming to another game and hope to bump into you guys there.
It would be fantastic. Thanks very much for watching. Enjoy the international break. We'll see you at Blackpool, and next Monday we'll be reviewing the game. Thanks very much, guys.